Hello, Marina.
Hi, Florencia.
Thank you for being here. I'm very grateful for having the chance to meet you and talk about this wonderful book. And it feels weird to be talking with you for the first time because it seems to me that we've been in a deep dialogue during the Southern Spring of 2019, quite a century ago, when I translated Insomnia for Chai's Spanish edition. The first thing I want to ask you about, considering all we've been through since then, is insomnia and lockdown. Do you think sleeplessness has increased during this awkward and especially anxious period? And in your first book, Living at the End of the World, you explore historical and modern day end time cults. I guess these days, more than 20 years later, are very fertile for that reflection too.
That's right. I mean, it's almost as if people have been joking that it's become a sort of like a standard phrase of, well, of course we're living through the apocalypse now, but it's not what we expected. It's not an explosive event. It's just, things happening very quietly, but that's the way it seems to be going. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think there's been a tremendous anxiety, in some ways more anxiety the longer that this strange circumstance has persisted. I think the more anxiety has grown, because at the beginning it was just so strange and unusual, and I think that people didn't think it would go on so long, and they felt like it was a strange interruption to our lives that we would somehow just kind of, scurry away to our homes and be locked inside, and then we'd be released again very quickly and life would become normal. And I think that the fact that life hasn't become normal and may never again be normal in the way that we expect has caused a great deal of anxiety and uncertainty. And those things fuel insomnia, of course they do. And certainly in Britain, I've definitely been asked to kind of write articles or for the paper or speak on the radio about sleep in the pandemic, because also I think another reason why it's been so difficult for people to sleep during the pandemic is because you're in the house all the time. There is no different kind of physical energy that's required of you, and so it's very difficult for your body to kind of make its own demarcation between night and day.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, somebody was saying, we're working from home is not really the right way to frame what we've experienced during this pandemic. It's more accurate to say we live at work. And if you live at work, it's very hard to sleep because you can't switch off.
Yeah. My next question is, how do visual arts, mythology, folkloric tales, poetry, science, economic history, and psychoanalysis, the topics that are present in Insomnia, influence your life? And how did you develop this type of narrative composed by merging different genres and materials? Does it have any relation with your work as a senior editor at Ion magazine?
Gosh, that's a huge question. I think I should say first and foremost that possibly the biggest influence on Insomnia in terms of its formal structure was poetry. Like a poem, there is a lot of a blank space in between very short little bursts of narration, and that white space allows the reader to kind of insert themselves as well into the kind of experience, and also to kind of read meaning into the spaces. And so the form is kind of deliberately epigrammatic. Each section ends often with a kind of provocation to get the reader to think about something. And I like to think that the writing itself is quite poetic. It's imagistic. It's concrete in places, it's abstract in places, but I've aimed for something fairly poetic. And to the extent that I brought in philosophy and mythology, and to a lesser degree perhaps science, but also visual arts, very much present in the book, is that I really wanted to kind of probe sleeplessness in a way that was not medical. I didn't want to treat insomnia as a problem in search of a cure. I wanted much more to look at a kind of cultural, personal, mythic dimensions of this phenomenon. Because I think that it's a much richer experience, perhaps, than we give it credit for when we medicalize it and we just say, oh, it's a lack of sleep and it's produced by anxiety and let's treat it with pills. I thought it was a much neglected area in terms of its kind of poetic potential, and I was very interested in looking at the idea of kind of longing and yearning, which is what happens when you feel like the void is, you're inhabiting the void. You are longing for things to happen, for things to exist, for life to be different. It's a very poignant place to be when you're alone in the darkness. And so I think insomnia, and also the other phenomenon, of course, is you can't switch your brain off. So I really approached insomnia from 2 points of view, as a phenomenon of excess thinking, but also a phenomenon of excess longing. And so it seemed very natural from that starting point to reach for literature and visual art, to explore some of its more unusual pathways and resonances.
And what about its structure, which is very fragmentary? Was it hard to puzzle it and bring it together in a structure like the one it has?
I'm not sure whether I'm supposed to say it was extremely difficult, but actually, funnily enough, I wrote it in what I saw as narrative chunks. And actually, one of my readers said to me, which I liked the sound of, they said it was like a sleep wave. With the sleep wave has different phases. And so the book has different phases and it progresses in these narrative chunks. So in my mind, it was quite clear that the setup was to introduce people to this kind of highly enervated state. And it was very personal. But I was also setting up themes in that of not being being awake alone, but not being alone in the bedroom, in the sense that, I have this sleep partner who I refer to as ZZ, and to set up a contrast between the person who's sleeping and the person who's awake. It's not true that most of us sleep alone. A lot of people sleep with others. We are social creatures. We share beds with people. Usually it's a very intimate thing to share a bed with somebody, but when you're awake and they're asleep, there is like a chasm between you because you inhabit different worlds. And it gives the lie to this idea that insomnia is a lack, because actually you feel intensely present and you feel that the presence of the other person is intensely lacking. So insomnia has a lot of flips like that between light and dark and presence and absence. So the first phase really sets up that theme. And then I think I was very interested in looking at the idea of the island and enchanted sleep, and there's that second phase. And then I come to a more, I suppose, psychoanalytic approach where I'm looking at kind of, what insomnia might mean in terms of what the brain is doing. But again, I think you can be quite poetic about that, especially when you are accessing what the unconscious is doing. And I've also introduced this idea of enchanted sleep, I think, through art, through the particularly through Edward Burne-Jones's beautiful cycle of paintings of sleeping beauty. And yes, I suppose the last phase is quite an existential kind of inquiry, really, about what insomnia is for and what we can learn from it. Yes, I know that doesn't sound very clarifying, but in a way, insomnia is a very fragmented experience itself. It's very discordant and jarring. And I wanted to capture that in the way that the book is shaped. So it has these fragmentary bursts, which are kind of associative. They're linked associatively, the narrative. And that's very much how the insomniac mind works. It flips and flits from one thing to another in this associative way. You know, the line of a song might make you think of a historical personage, that might then make you think of a painting, that might then make you think of, you know, something else, and then occasionally you're thrown back into yourself. So I wanted to do a fragmented style that echoed and mirrored the insomniac experience.
Is there any material of the book that you came up with rather accidentally or by synchronicity?
Yeah, I think a lot of it in some ways, because, you know, I think you get very obsessive when you're writing a book. And I was kind of consuming reading, you know, I would suddenly have an idea about, oh, maybe there's something here that I can draw on, and I would get very obsessive about it. And, you know, it's almost like your antennae are up, and anything in the outside world that feels like it might have a place in your book, you're like a magpie, you go and grab it and bring it in. And so, yeah, there was a lot of chance readings that came my way. I remember thinking suddenly, I'll give you an example. I suddenly was thinking about enchanted sleep, and I thought, oh, what about, and I was remembering Oliver Sacks' book, Awakenings, and I suddenly remembered, what about those people who were in a deep fairy tale sleep? You know, and I went and drew the book out of the library, and I just thought there must be something in here that speaks to the kind of themes of insomnia and yearning and all those things about what it was like to wake up suddenly from a spell. So that was something that I remember that felt very much like a kind of chance encounter. Also, towards the end of the book, there was a beautiful chance encounter, because I had to go to Norway to speak about a different book. And one of the things that I did, because people had told me that I really must do this when I'm in Bergen, is I went to the Code art galleries, and they just happened to have an exhibition of Nikolai Astrup's work. And I had never come across him before. And I suddenly felt like that whole exhibition was made for me, because Astrup was clearly insomniac. He couldn't sleep, and he got up at night and he painted. And he painted with a nighttime palette. So all the colors change at night. And so suddenly I found myself, while I was writing Insomnia, but there to talk about a different book, I suddenly thought I must bring this into the book somehow. You know, this crepuscular palette that he has made from, he suffered terribly with asthma, and he couldn't sleep at night. He'd sit in a chair and he'd fall asleep, and every time his head fell to his chest, he'd wake up gasping for air. So he would go outside prowling the countryside and painting it at night. And I just thought, that's wonderful. It felt like one insomniac speaking to another across across geography and time, you know. So in he went into the book.
Yeah, and he brought a concept that is very important of the book, this of dark adapted, right?
Yeah, this idea of dark adapted sight. Yeah, absolutely. Which I really liked. And in a way, that was the challenge. That was my challenge, because at the beginning of the book, I set out this idea of, is there a nocturnal literacy that I'm missing here somehow, that I need to learn? If I'm awake at night and that's my world, how do I become literate in its ways? And Astrup, in a way, provided one of the solutions, becoming dark adapted.
Speaking about synchronicity, Jung is present in the part of the book where you explore darkness inside us, the shadow, and its analogy with alchemy. Do you agree with Bachelard on the relationship between outer immensity and inner intensity? Do you think the cosmic aspect of the night that insomniacs are aware of can be a possible way to get through to the unknown within us too, the dark night of the soul?
Florence, I'm so happy that you picked up on that, because I really deliberately put in this cosmicity. There is a cosmic element. There's a lot of kind of looking at the stars and thinking about the universe, and the reason I put it in is I think that sometimes that longing that I was talking about that you experience in insomnia is cosmic in its dimensions. It's that hunger for the small speck of human being to kind of commune with the cosmos, and something about the silencing of everything else at night. So the rest of the world stops and only you are awake, like a beacon of consciousness. And I think your mind is drawn towards the heavens. So there are lots of places in the book where this cosmic element breaks through. And, you know, Bachelard says beautiful things in The Poetics of Space about how there is a correlation, as you put it, between an inner intensity and an outer immensity. And I think you feel that very keenly in Insomnia. I also anchored it actually to, as you know, because you translated the book, to my mother's experience of sleeping under the stars at night in Iraq when it was too hot to sleep indoors. They took their mattresses outside, and I'm saying how wonderful, you know, to have the stars for your ceiling. This lovely canopy of stars to go to sleep beneath. Yeah, so, and I think on it slightly, perhaps we look at, you're right, the darkness within is something that the sky, maybe the dark sky reflects back at us. And that darkness within is something that, yes, psychoanalysis has a great deal to talk about. And what I like about Jung is unafraid of it. And Jung wants us to embrace that shadow side of us, and not to be fearful of that darkness. And in Bachelardian terms, of course, you know, in The Poetics of Space, he talks about the house, and for him, the sky is the cosmic part, is the kind of the aspirational part of humanity. We reach for the sky when we want to be the best thing that we are. And the darkness is the basement, it's the house where all the ghouls live, in the cellar, the place we don't want to go, the things we're too scared to visit. And so, yeah, all those ideas were teeming when I was thinking about, you know, all the nightmarish aspects of the dark night as well. The dark night and the dark soul, and how they meet.
That's my favorite part of the book. Your work shows you have a deep interest in midlife. I think this hasn't been a topic very explored in literature. Do you think so? Can you think of any reason why?
Yeah, it is. It is my interest at the moment. And Insomnio, I would say, is my second book in this area of being interested in midlife. So there is another book, The Middle Pause, where I look at turning 50. And I find it absolutely fascinating, because I think, I mean, my feeling is that, you know, your 50s are very much like your 30s. They are a moment of real self-actualization, where everything is up for grabs and you make another stab at defining who you are. And in your 30s, I think it's the moment where you set yourself up for adulthood, and you decide on a path that, you know, you think will probably last for a number of decades. And, you know, if I might bring up Jung again, you know, Jung says, you know, the midlife crisis, which often happens in your 50s or thereabouts, midlife anyway, is that moment where you realize that the self that has been driving you since your early 30s, the self that formed the adult, is largely driven by ego. Mm-hmm. And in your 50s, you realize you can't be driven by ego anymore, because where you've arrived at might not match where you thought ego would take you. And to avoid that crushing disappointment, you have to reject ego, and you have to kind of take yourself apart, literally take yourself apart, and find out who you are again. And for Jung, it's very much a part of, you know, acknowledging the shadow side that you've been running away from, and somehow embracing that and integrating that into your being, so that you move ahead with a different kind of self-awareness and self-knowledge. And that was very interesting to me, this whole idea that in your 50s and in your midlife, whole other areas of experience might then become available to you, because you've dismantled the self. And so there's maybe what I would call a liminal period, when you can see where I'm going here, because I think in Insomnia, you are in a liminal space as well. Being awake at night is not where you're meant to be. It's a trespass. And so you're in this kind of unmoored place of darkness and uncertainty. And midlife is like that too. And I think it's a very provocative and powerful place to be. And I think furthermore, it speaks to me in terms of female consciousness, because I think female consciousness is this kind of dark and watery place where it's quite fluid. And, you know, I think that idea of dwelling in uncertainty, somehow it speaks to me as a woman. So yes, I find it a very fertile area to write about. And I mean, there's not many women in midlife who feature in novels that I can think of. Mrs. Dalloway, maybe the characters in Anita Bruckner's novel. I'd be very interested to know in Spanish literature whether women in midlife feature. If they do, they often feature as sad, lonely, sort of women who haven't been, who either have feel like the best part of their lives has passed them by, or they're desperately lonely, or they've failed in some way as humans. So there aren't many, I suppose, dynamic portrayals of women in midlife. Not that I'm necessarily after that, because I kind of gravitate towards the lonely, uncertain, sad, melancholic. That appeals to me as a writer, and I think I'm at home in elegy as a form.
Speaking about midlife, I read an interesting suggestion on your website. You say, in recent years, my work has been fueled by a desire to explore midlife and its particular, sometimes unsettling, sometimes transformative energies. 2 books into this project, I find I'm sorely tempted to aim for a trilogy. Can you give us any hint of where this temptation is heading?
Yeah, I mean, I can. It's so I am at work on a new book, and it's a kind of it's also a memoir, and it's a book of essays. And again, I'm exploring kind of female identity, and I'm trying to write about very everyday things, but give them a kind of a bit of a sting in the tail. So writing about, cleaning your house. I'm writing about domestic work, and I'm writing about childhood, and I'm writing about marriage. So I'm writing about kind of really essays that go from the beginning of life to the end, and I'm trying to find ways of connecting my personal experience to broader themes that will hopefully resonate with others. So yeah, it's fairly early stages. I'm thinking of calling the book Sex Work.
Oh, very interesting title. Okay. Maybe I think it is not a topic which is very explored in literature, because it's kind of taboo, this part of life where something about our cycle and sexuality changes, and it hasn't had a lot of space to develop this theme and to speak about it. So I'm glad you do.
Thank you.
The last one might be, you do an analogy in the book, a parallel between sleep and love, as for they both need require trust, and also between collage and love. Can we extend this analogy to the task of writing, which also requires trust and implies an expansion, but also a task of cutting and folding and curating the work?
Yeah, that's so nicely put, Florencia. Thank you for asking that question. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm very romantic, really, at heart, and I think that the theme of love and sleep and intimacy are very much, and longing are very much woven into this book. And I do think, in the end, I went for this idea of collage because I wanted to. It goes back to this way of linking the unconscious and creativity into the way that I think perhaps we operate when we write and think and sleep and dream and love. We don't follow narrative patterns, I think, very smoothly. There's a lot of kind of discord and breakage and collage-like, but when the pieces of the mosaic come together, something very beautiful can arise. And I think something like, the integrity of a dream or the beauty of a piece of a painting feels like lots of different elements kind of coming together to sing. And, I think I think writing at its best can be like that, that when you feel that it's working at its best, or you're right inside of it and it's all working as it should, which are very rare moments, I must say, in the life of a writer, because mostly, for me anyway, it feels like I'm sort of, slicing my flesh open and spilling blood. But when it comes together in those moments of magic, it does feel like, disparate elements uniting into this kind of whole. And there are various images in the book Insomnio that I can't help myself, that I keep coming back to those images. Like when I thought about, how sometimes, your brain awake at night feels like data streaming, and, maybe you lie awake at night and you imagine all these other insomniacs lying at night, and each one is a stream of data, and all these streams of data are emanating from the houses like some sci-fi movie, and some amazing arc of light reaching up to the heavens. It sounds completely mad, but I think there's something about that, untapped creative human energy that kind of excites me. Yeah. I know I've answered your question in a really bizarre way. I feel like I haven't answered it really very directly, but there is something about writing that is, when it is going well, that is like nothing else in the world in a way, except maybe love.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure for me to have this opportunity.
Thank you, Florencia, for asking such wonderful questions. You really got to the heart of some of the things that I'm trying to do with the book.
Thank you.
Thank you.